Hey y'all, Melissa here with you today, and today's topic is piping. Piping is this detail you can see here. It is dimensional cording sewn into fabric and then sewn into a seam line. Now this seam line is on my peppermint pajamas pattern, and I'm sewing it up in my Blooms and Bobbins fabric, and I have links to both the pattern and sources for the fabric below. But what we're talking about today specifically is how do you make and sew piping so that you can add these kinds of cute details into a seam. So you can purchase piping in a package just like this, and what you get when it's open normally looks like this. This mostly comes in solid colors, so if you would like to make your own piping, that is possible as well. Now to make piping, you're going to start with bias tape. And I'm not going to talk about how to make bias tape in this video because I have a whole other video about how to make bias tape. Now the difference is you're going to cut it all on the bias, but you are not going to do the bias tape pressing folds on it. You want to leave the edges raw. And then you also, if you're making yours, need to purchase cording, and this is what's going to go in the middle of the bias tape here, and that's what's going to create the piping. Now this cording is 3 30-seconds width. This is the smallest size cording that was carried at my fabric store, and oftentimes the cording is back in the home decor section of the fabric store, so if you can't find it in any of the normal fabric sections, you might want to go look back in home decor, and they have all kinds of different widths down from this 3 30-seconds width to big fat cording that you might use on upholstery. To make piping yourself, after you've got that bias tape and your cording, basically what you're going to do is you're going to be wrapping the bias tape around the cording, and then you're going to be stitching so to keep the cording right against the fold of your bias tape. And in order to do that, you're going to need to use a different presser foot. So this is the standard zipper foot that comes with my machine and comes with many machines that have a zipper foot. But as you can see, it is a little bit wide, like it barely fits between the cording and the edge of the fabric there. So if your machine comes with, this is a piping foot, and I actually prefer to use this one. It is a little narrower, and you can also adjust the width, and it's not so wiggly as the zipper foot. My favorite actually though is to use if you get a narrow zipper foot. Now this is not one my machine came with, but you can order these, and if your machine will take a snap-on foot, this will snap in, and it has a, since it's narrower, it keeps a good amount of fabric under the foot, and you can get right up next to the cording. I will have a link to this one below in the description of the video, but let's go ahead and see how you would use this on the machine. So let me snap this in, and then I need to move my needle so that it doesn't hit the center of this foot. So I want it on that side so it'll be right up against the cording. I don't generally like to pin when I am doing piping. I like to just fold my fabric in half, get my presser foot right up against that edge, and then kind of stitch slowly, and I'll pause and roll more fabric when I get to a point where I need to. So you can see why I prefer the narrow presser foot, because even with this narrow presser foot, I am barely getting enough fabric under the foot to stitch this. A wider foot would be out here with no fabric under it. So you would just go ahead and stitch all the way down until you have your piping made. Now here is a piece that I've already made so you can see what it looks like. And I think it's just fun because you can get cute details like this printed fabric and these little accents on the piping instead of whatever solid colors you can find at the store. Let's talk about actually sewing the piping on. So this here is a pair of my peppermint pajama pattern. This is the bottom. And what I want to do is I want to sew piping here into the pocket. So what I'm going to need to do first to make sure that I place my piping correctly is mark the seam line. And on this particular pattern, there is a 1/2 inch seam line. But if I set my ruler at 1/2 inch and then mark it, I'm going to add extra width to it because of the width of my chalk that I'm using. So I'm actually going to pull this back to 3/8 of an inch, and then I'm going to mark, and you see how my chalk kind of adds 1/8 of an inch. So now I'm at 1/2 inch, just like I should be. So I have my seam line marked out here on the pants pattern, and then what I want to do is I want to pin my piping where the piping is, the seam on the piping is going to be on the seam line of the pants as well. And when I do this, I do actually use pins because it helps to keep it in place. And then what I want to do is go ahead and snip off the piping and take this over to the sewing machine, and then I'm just going to stitch that right on. And then once this is stitched on one time, then you can go ahead and pin on your fabric to go stitch the seam. Now, sometimes people recommend, and sometimes when I'm in a hurry, I have done this all in one step, like I've pinned the piping in and then pinned the other fabric on top and only sewn it once. And I will say that in general, when I've done it that way, because of this being dimensional and not wanting to lay flat, I've always ended up regretting it because I don't get the stitching quite as close to the cording as I would like. Okay, so once you have that piping stitched in, then you can go ahead and you can turn your seam right side out, and you can go ahead and press that. And sometimes it's even advisable to do yet another line of stitching at this point so that you can keep the piping from rolling too far out. That's kind of up to you if you would like to do that. But then you would just go ahead and continue to sew the exact same way that you sewed according to the directions. You don't need to worry about the piping anymore. Except for one further tip that I have. If the ends of the piping are going to be crossed by another seam, as these are, I often recommend that you pull out a little of the cording and snip it off, and then pull the piping back kind of over that so that you have this end here with no piping in it, no cording, and then there won't add extra bulk to the seam there. It's just like a flattened tube of fabric. So I'm going to do that on each end here. And there we go. Now I have two ends that don't have cording in them so that they'll be easier to sew into the seams that will cross. But that's it. That's basically how you sew piping, and that can be a fun little accent to lots of different pattern details if you decide to use it.